Hey, everyone. Tonight's story is going to be a bit different. A slow burn, designed to make you feel that creeping unease, that tension when you're all alone in an unfamiliar place. If you've ever found yourself in a situation where the atmosphere feels off, like something's just wrong, you'll know exactly what I'm talking about. Before we get started, I want to ask you, have you ever wandered into an abandoned building or someplace you weren't supposed to be? What did it feel like? Drop your experiences in the comments. I'd love to read them. And trust me, for this story, you'll want to wear headphones. The sound, the whispers, the tension, they're best experienced in the dark, with nothing but your imagination to fill in the blanks. So, dim the lights, settle in, and let's get started. It all started innocently enough. A group of friends and I were chatting about urban legends and ghost stories. You know the type, those creepy tales you hear late at night or when someone brings up some local haunted spot. That's when Tyler, the ringleader of our group, brought up the old Crimson Park, an amusement park that had been abandoned for years. Crimson Park was once a thriving local attraction back in the 70s. But after a tragic accident, a malfunction on the Ferris wheel that left 3 people dead, the park never recovered. Lawsuits, bad press, you name it. Eventually it was shuttered, left to rot in the outskirts of town. I'm telling you, Tyler said, leaning in like he was about to share some deep secret. People still hear the music playing from the carousel late at night, like real late, midnight, maybe 3 a.m. We all laughed it off, but in the back of my mind, something clicked. You ever get that itch? That curiosity you can't shake off, no matter how creepy the story? Yeah, that's what I was feeling. So I casually suggested we check it out one weekend, just for fun. I didn't really expect anyone to take me seriously, but here's where it got weird. Tyler, usually the one full of bravado, hesitated. "I've been there," he muttered, his voice lowering. "It's not like the stories, man. It's worse. What would you do? Would you go anyway? Or would you leave it alone? Let me know in the comments below." A week later, Tyler and I drove out to Crimson Park. It was a crisp autumn evening. The kind where the cold creeps into your bones. As we neared the park, the road turned from asphalt to cracked concrete. The surrounding trees clawing at the sky like skeletal fingers. The entrance was still there, faded, rusty letters spelling out Crimson Park above a gate that had long since fallen apart. The place was bigger than I imagined. Rusted rides towered over the landscape, their silhouettes barely visible against the darkening sky. The air was thick with that old wet leaf smell, mixed with a metallic tinge I couldn't quite place. You ever step into a place and feel like you shouldn't be there, like the place itself is aware of you? That's exactly what it felt like. We climbed through the broken gate, and immediately I could feel something was off. It wasn't just the eerie quiet, or the fact that no one had been here in years. It was the way the park felt, like it was watching us. Tyler was unusually quiet. Sticking close to me, I asked him what his deal was, but he just shook his head, refusing to meet my eyes. "What's up, man? You were all cocky about this place last week," I joked, trying to lighten the mood, but his response? Just a muttered, "You'll see. Now, before we go on, I want to hear from you. What would you do if a place felt wrong? Would you keep going? Let me know. I want to see how brave you guys really are." As we moved deeper into the park, the rides loomed over us like forgotten giants. The Ferris wheel, now just a twisted hunk of rusted metal, creaked every now and then, like it was groaning from the weight of all the memories it held. I couldn't help but imagine that horrible accident all those years ago. The way the metal must have screamed as it tore loose. The shrieks of the people on board as they plummeted to their deaths. I shook the thought from my mind. But I couldn't shake the feeling that someone, no, something, was watching us. Tyler kept glancing behind us and as if expecting to see someone trailing along the path. "Hey, you hear that?" he whispered, stopping suddenly. I listened. At first there was nothing but the rustling of leaves, but then, faintly, the sound of a child's laughter. My stomach dropped. It was soft, distant, almost like it was coming from the carousel up ahead. We approached it slowly. The once colorful horses now faded and chipped, frozen in mid-gallop, and that's when I saw it. A single horse moving, not fast, just a slow, steady rhythm. Like someone had given it a gentle push. The wind? Maybe. But the air was completely still. Tyler grabbed my arm, his voice shaky. "We need to leave. Now." "What would you do?" "Keep going or listen to Tyler. Comment down below and tell me how you'd handle this." I convinced Tyler to push forward. Call it stupid, call it reckless, but I had to know more. There was this structure just past the carousel, the park's old mirror maze. If you've ever been in one, you know how disorienting they can be. Imagine one that's been left to decay for decades. We stepped inside, the glass coated in dust, and the mirrors, most of them cracked, still stood, reflecting 1,000 versions of myself and Tyler. The feeling of isolation deepened. Each step forward felt like we were walking further into a trap, and that's when I saw something. Not in the mirrors directly, but out of the corner of my eye, a figure, small, standing just behind one of the cracked panels. It was a child. Pale, unmoving, and her eyes locked on mine through the fractured glass. I froze. "Tyler, do you see that?" He didn't respond. When I looked over at him, his eyes were wide, staring straight ahead. "We have to leave," he whispered, his voice trembling. I turned back to the mirror, but the figure was gone. I didn't need more convincing. We ran. What would you have done? Let me know in the comments if you would have stayed to investigate, or if you'd have booked it like we did. We sprinted through the park, the sound of our footsteps echoing off the abandoned structures, but here's where it gets strange. No matter how far we ran, the entrance, where we came in, never appeared. It was like we were trapped in a loop, running through the same stretches of the park over and over again. Then, from behind us, I heard it. The sound of that damn carousel music, but this time it wasn't faint. It was loud, echoing through the empty park, taunting us. Tyler screamed at me to run, but there was nowhere to go. The park had us. We finally made it out, hours later, when the sun started to rise. But the park, it didn't let us go without leaving its mark. Tyler, he hasn't spoken about that night since. As for me, I can still hear that carousel music. Every once in a while. Sometimes I swear I see that little girl in the corner of my eye, but that's enough for me. Now it's your turn. Have you ever had an experience like this? Something that left you rattled, like you weren't alone even when you should have been? Drop your stories in the comments. I'd love to hear them. And hey, if this story got under your skin, give the video a like and subscribe for more. Trust me, the next one is even better. Thanks for watching. And don't forget to sleep with one eye open. You never know what's watching. After Crimson Park, I promised myself I'd never go near another abandoned place again. And for a while I didn't. Life returned to normal. I got back into my routine, and the nightmares, the ones about that Ferris wheel, the carousel, and that damn child, they started to fade. But you know how it is. That feeling of curiosity, of not being able to leave well enough alone, it gnawed at me. About 6 months after that incident, I came across a story online about an old amusement park on the coast. Revenant Pier was the name. An old boardwalk attraction that had been abandoned for years after a series of strange drownings. The locals said it was cursed, that the water itself had claimed those who wandered too close to the pier at night. You'd think I'd know better by now. But instead of closing my laptop and moving on, I found myself researching more. Photos of the rusted rides, the crumbling roller coaster that stretched out over the water, the twisted remains of the funhouse. All of it felt eerily familiar. But there was one thing that caught my eye more than the rest: the old arcade. I couldn't explain it, but something about that place, it called to me. It was late when I arrived, sometime after midnight. I parked my car near the beach. The waves crashing in the distance and made my way toward the pier. The air smelled of salt and decay. The kind of thick, briny scent that sticks to your clothes and skin. Revenant Pier wasn't like Crimson Park. This place didn't feel abandoned so much as dormant. The boardwalk creaked under my weight as I stepped onto it. The hollow echoes of my footsteps filling the otherwise silent night. The moon hung low in the sky, casting long shadows over the remains of the attractions, but everything was still. Too still. Ahead of me was the arcade. Its once bright neon sign hung crookedly from its post. One side dangling by a single wire, the lights long extinguished as I approached. The faint sound of crashing waves faded, replaced by a low hum, almost like the distant hum of power. But how could that be possible? The place hadn't had electricity in years. I hesitated at the entrance, staring at the glass doors. They were dirty, smeared with the remnants of time. But behind them, I could make out the faint outline of the arcade machines, lined up in neat little rows. I pushed open the door and it gave way with a groan. Inside, the air was stale, thick with the scent of mold and old metal. Rows of cabinets stretched out in front of me, their screens dark and lifeless, but the strangest thing, they were clean. The rest of the pier had been decaying for years, but these machines, despite the layer of dust, seemed untouched by time, as if they were waiting for someone to play. I walked down the first aisle, my hand brushing against one of the controls. It was cold, slick with grime, and I felt a shiver run down my spine. Something about this place felt wrong, off. And then I saw it. In the back of the arcade there was a machine, an old faded cabinet with no title. The screen flickered to life as I approached, the glow casting long shadows against the floor. The hum I'd heard earlier grew louder, more insistent. My hands felt clammy, and my pulse quickened. You ever felt like something was inviting you in, like it wanted you to get closer, to touch it? That's exactly what it felt like. I reached out, almost without thinking, and pressed the start button. The screen went black for a moment, before an image appeared, an image of the pier, but it was different. The rides were moving, the lights flickering in the distance. And the ocean was calm, but something was off. There, in the center of the screen, was a small figure standing at the end of the pier, looking out over the water. I blinked, and the figure was gone. My heart raced, but I couldn't pull myself away from the screen. The hum grew louder, more oppressive. And just when I thought I couldn't take it anymore, the screen flashed, displaying a single word: play. I didn't want to, but I pressed the button again. Immediately the image changed. This time it showed a first-person view of someone walking through the arcade. The camera turned down the aisles, and I realized with a jolt that it was mimicking my exact movements, Pause 2S. I was seeing myself on screen. The figure, the one from before, reappeared, this time closer. It stood near the door, its back turned to me, just standing there, motionless. My palms were slick with sweat, my breath coming in shallow gasps. I took a step back from the machine, but the figure on the screen, it didn't move. You ever have that sinking feeling like something terrible is about to happen? I wanted to leave, but my feet felt glued to the floor. And then the door at the entrance of the arcade slammed shut with a loud bang. The figure turned slowly, its face hidden in the shadows. I could hear footsteps now, coming from the screen, but also from behind me. They were slow, deliberate, like someone or something was making its way toward me. I whipped around, but the arcade was empty. The footsteps continued, though, growing louder, closer, and then the machine cut to static. I bolted out of the arcade and onto the pier, the cool night air hitting me like a slap to the face. I could still hear the footsteps behind me, but I didn't dare look back. I sprinted toward the end of the pier, where the old roller coaster loomed like a twisted skeleton above the water. The ocean was different now. The waves had grown still, almost glass-like, reflecting the moonlight in a way that made them seem unnatural. And then I saw her. A figure, a woman this time, stood at the edge of the pier, her back to me. She was wearing something white, a dress maybe, and her hair was long, hanging loose down her back. She didn't move, it didn't acknowledge me, just stood there while I'm gazing out over the water. For a moment I thought she might jump, but then she turned, slowly, unnaturally, and looked at me. Her eyes, they were empty, hollow. "Help me," she whispered, though her lips didn't move. The words echoed in my mind, clear as day. I didn't wait, I ran. So, that's the story of Revenant Pier. I never went back, and I never found out what really happened that night, but I can still hear those footsteps. Sometimes when it's quiet, and sometimes I see her in the corners of my eye, always at the water's edge. But what about you? Have you ever been to a place like that, where the air feels thick with something unseen? Share your stories in the comments below. I'd love to know if anyone else has felt the way I did that night, and keep your eyes peeled. You never know when a place will call out to you, asking you to come closer, to play. You'd think that after Revenant Pier, I would have had enough of forgotten places. But when you've been touched by something like that, it's hard to just go back to normal life. That's why, when I heard about the Wonderland Fair, I couldn't resist. The Wonderland Fair wasn't just any old amusement park. It was massive, a sprawling carnival that had once boasted the tallest Ferris wheel in the country. A fun house with endless twisting corridors and rides that could turn your stomach inside out. It was supposed to be a summer-long attraction, traveling from city to city, but in 1996 it stopped in a small town called Millhaven and never left. The story goes that after a series of mysterious disappearances, the fair was shut down overnight, with everything left behind as if the people had just vanished. I wasn't actively looking for a new place to explore, but I overheard someone talking about it at a local diner. A man sitting 2 booths over was telling his friend about how he and a few others had dared to sneak into the fairgrounds one night. They say the rides still work. The man had whispered, his voice thick with unease, even without power. That was enough to spark my curiosity again. Despite everything that had happened before, there was something undeniably eerie about a carnival frozen in time. A place meant for joy and excitement, now abandoned and decaying. I had to see it for myself. I left my house at midnight. The drive to Millhaven stretched out in front of me like an endless road through the dark. I kept my car windows rolled down, letting the cool night air whip through the cabin, hoping it would keep me alert. The GPS led me down winding country roads. Each turn seemed to take me farther away from civilization and deeper into the quiet, unsettling emptiness of the rural landscape. It was a 2-hour drive, but it felt longer. By the time I saw the faint glow of Millhaven streetlights, a gnawing pit of anxiety had settled in my stomach. I knew this was a bad idea. Hell, I'd had enough warnings from past experiences, but something about the Wonderland Fair called to me, just like those other places had. Maybe it was the thought of those missing people, or the mystery of how a massive carnival could just be left to rot, forgotten by everyone except the locals. The fairgrounds sat at the edge of town, on a vast, overgrown lot. I pulled up next to a rusted gate that had been chained shut for years. Beyond it, I could just make out the tops of the rides, the Ferris wheel standing tall against the backdrop of the night sky. I grabbed my flashlight and climbed over the gate. The first thing that hit me was the smell. It wasn't just the scent of decay. There was something else, too. It was faint, but unmistakable. The sickly sweet smell of cotton candy, fresh. The Wonderland Fair was massive, and its paths overgrown with weeds and grass. Rides stood like towering corpses. Their once bright colors faded and peeling. The silence was oppressive, broken only by the occasional creak of metal in the breeze. I made my way past the ticket booths, their windows smashed in, and deeper into the fairgrounds. The booths for carnival games still had stuffed animals hanging from the walls, now tattered and filthy, but eerily untouched by time. I could almost picture the place as it must have been back in its prime. Laughter, music, the sound of the carousel spinning. But tonight, the only sounds were the ones I made. Every step seemed to echo louder than it should, the crunch of gravel underfoot reverberating in the stillness. You ever get that feeling, like you're being watched, not by a person, but by the place itself? That's what the Wonderland Fair felt like. Each turn I took, each ride I passed, I couldn't shake the sensation that the park was aware of me, like it was waiting. I rounded a corner and stopped. There, ahead of me, was the Ferris wheel, and it was moving, slowly, almost imperceptibly at first. The massive wheel was turning, but there was no sound, no creak of rusted metal, no hum of machinery, just the quiet, steady rotation of the cars, swaying gently in the night breeze. I'll admit, but my first instinct was to run, but my legs wouldn't move, frozen by a mix of fear and curiosity. Against my better judgment, I approached the Ferris wheel. The closer I got, the more I could hear it, a soft rhythmic creak, almost like breathing, As I stood there, staring up at the slowly turning wheel, something caught my eye. One of the cars, an old red one near the top, looked wrong. There was something in it, or someone. I blinked, trying to focus in the dim light. For a moment, I could have sworn I saw the outline of a person, a shadow, hunched over, a head bowed. But when the car swung around again, it was empty. That's when I heard the music. It started low, barely more than a hum at first, but as it grew louder, I recognized it, a distorted version of carnival music, like something you'd hear on an old broken radio. The notes were off-key, warbling in and out of tune, and it was coming from the fun house just beyond the Ferris wheel. The sign above the entrance, hanging by one loose chain, read House of Mirrors. The doors were slightly ajar, the once bright paint now chipped and peeling. I wasn't sure why I moved toward it. Maybe I was drawn by the music, or maybe I just needed to know if I was alone here. I pushed open the door and stepped inside. The inside of the funhouse was worse than I imagined. The air was thick with dust, and the mirrors, most of them cracked or shattered, lined every wall. As I stepped further in, the distorted music seemed to surround me, echoing from every direction. It didn't take long for me to realize I was lost. Each corridor looked the same, endless mirrors reflecting me back at myself, or over and over again. The reflections seemed wrong, though. In some I looked taller, thinner. In others my face was distorted, stretched into a grotesque grin. But it was the mirrors that weren't cracked that unsettled me the most. In one I caught a glimpse of myself, but something was off. My reflection wasn't moving the way I was. As I turned to walk down another hall, the figure in the mirror stayed still for a moment longer before following suit. I stopped, my heart pounding, and watched as the reflection lagged behind, its movement slow, deliberate, and then it smiled. A wide, unnatural grin stretched across its face, even though mine stayed frozen in shock. You ever have that moment where your brain just stops processing? That's what happened to me. I couldn't think, couldn't breathe. All I could do was stare as my reflection, a twisted version of myself, moved closer to the glass, pressing its hands against the surface, its grin widening. Suddenly the music stopped. Dead silence filled the room. And then, from behind me, I heard a whisper, my name. I ran. I bolted through the corridors of the fun house, my footsteps echoing louder than they should have. Every turn I made, I saw my reflection, that same grinning version of me watching from the mirrors. I didn't stop running until I was back outside, gasping for breath, my heart pounding in my chest. The fairground was still. The Ferris wheel had stopped moving. But there in the distance, I saw something new. A ride that hadn't been there before, a carousel, its lights flickering in the darkness. The carousel wasn't running it. Not yet. But I could see the shadows of figures, unmoving, seated on the faded horses. I don't know why, but I felt like it was waiting for me. I took a step toward it and then another. The music from the funhouse was back, though faint, like a distant memory. As I neared the carousel, the horses seemed to shift, their painted eyes following me. I reached out to touch one of them, and the carousel jolted to life. I don't remember much after that. I woke up back at my car, the sun just starting to rise and my hands covered in dirt. But there's something else. Since that night, every now and then I hear it, the faint sound of carnival music. Sometimes, when I pass a mirror, I catch a glimpse of my reflection, and it's still grinning. Has anything like this ever happened to you? Have you ever felt like you weren't alone in a place you shouldn't have been? Share your stories in the comments below. If this story gave you chills, go ahead and hit the like button and subscribe for more stories like this.